The grand hall of the obsidian palace was suffocating, not from heat, but from the sheer weight of opulence. Hey friends, welcome. I'm Marcus. Another incredible gladiator story for you today. This isn't just a story about blood and sand, it's about the cost of a human soul. Let me know where you're watching from and please hit that subscribe button. Let's get started. Thousands of candles flickered in crystal chandeliers, casting a golden, trembling light over the masked nobility of Eldoria. It was the night of the Masquerade of Whispers, the 10th anniversary of the end of the Civil War, and the 10th anniversary of Queen Seraphina's ascension to the throne. The air smelled of roasted swan, expensive perfume, and the underlying, metallic tang of fear that always lingered around a queen. Seraphina sat on her elevated throne, looking down at the swirling sea of silk and velvet. She wore a gown of midnight blue, encrusted with diamonds that looked like frozen tears. Her face was hidden behind a delicate silver mask, but her eyes, sharp and icy blue, scanned every corner of the room. She wasn't looking for friends. She didn't have any. She was looking for threats. For 10 years, she had ruled with an iron fist wrapped in a velvet glove. She had rebuilt the kingdom from the ashes of her husband's madness. King Thorn. The name still made her stomach twist. History remembered him as a tragic figure, a king who fell from the cliffs of sorrow during a hunting accident, taken by the sea before his time. A tragedy that left a young, grieving widow to carry the burden of the crown alone. That was the official story. The story etched into marble statues and sung by bards. The truth was a rot inside Seraphina's soul. The truth was that there was no accident. There was no slip of the boot. There was only a rainy night, a screaming argument on the edge of the precipice, and a shove. She remembered the feeling of his velvet coat under her palms, the look of utter betrayal in his eyes, and the silence that followed the splash in the violent waves below. She had killed him. She had to. Thorn was a monster, a tyrant who enjoyed pain too much, who planned to burn the capital to the ground just to see the colors. She had saved the kingdom, but she had never found the body. The tides at the cliffs of sorrow were treacherous, they claimed everything they touched. No corpse ever washed up. For a decade, Seraphina had told herself it was over. He was fish food. He was gone. So why did the hairs on the back of her neck stand up tonight, Your Majesty? A voice murmured beside her. It was Lord Valerius, her spymaster, a man who moved like a shadow. The guests are waiting for the toast of remembrance. It is time, Seraphina nodded, suppressing a shudder. She stood up, her heavy gown rustling. As she descended the stairs of the dais, the music softened. The crowd parted, bowing low, creating a path for her. She was beautiful, terrifying, and untouchable. She took the crystal goblet offered to her. She raised it high, to the memory of King Thorn. She said, her voice steady, practiced. May he find in death the peace he could not find in life. To King Thorn, the crowd echoed. She raised the glass to her lips. And then she froze. Across the room, near the towering double doors that led to the winter gardens, a man was standing. He wasn't bowing. He was the only person in the room standing upright, staring directly at her. He wore a suit of deep crimson velvet, cut in a style that had been out of fashion for a decade. He wore a mask, a full-face mask made of white porcelain, painted with a single, frozen tear under the left eye. Seraphina's breath caught in her throat. The glass slipped from her fingers. Smash! The sound of shattering crystal silenced the room instantly. Red wine spilled across the white marble floor like a fresh wound. Your Majesty. Valerius stepped forward, concerned. Are you unwell? Seraphina didn't hear him. She couldn't hear anything but the roaring of blood in her ears. She knew that suit. She had commissioned it for Thorn's 30th birthday. The birthday he never reached. And the mask, that was the mask he used to wear when he visited the dungeons, for entertainment. The figure in crimson tilted his head. It was a distinctive, mocking gesture. A gesture Thorn used to make right before he hurt someone. It's not possible, Seraphina whispered, her hand clutching her throat. I saw him fall, the figure turned and walked slowly out the double doors. Into the swirling snow of the gardens. He didn't run. He walked with a limp. A limp on the left leg. Thorn had broken his left leg in a riding accident 3 years before he died. He had never walked evenly again. "Excuse me," Serafina gasped. She pushed past Valerius, ignoring protocol, ignoring the shocked gasps of the court. She gathered her skirts and ran. She ran toward the doors, her heart hammering against her ribs like a prisoner trying to escape. She burst out into the cold night air. The garden was a labyrinth of frozen rose bushes and stone statues, covered in a thick blanket of snow. The wind bit at her exposed skin, but the adrenaline kept her warm. "Where are you?" she screamed into the wind. "Show yourself." Footsteps crunched in the snow ahead. Slow. Deliberate. Crunch. Drag. Crunch. Drag. She followed the sound, winding deeper into the maze. The light from the palace windows faded, leaving her in the blue-gray gloom of the moon. She turned a corner near the old fountain and stopped. He was there. Sitting on the edge of the frozen fountain, his back to her. He was toying with a coin, flipping it over his knuckles. Serafina's hand went to the hidden dagger in the folds of her dress. She never went anywhere without it. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice shaking. "If this is a joke, I will have your head on a spike before sunrise." The man stopped flipping the coin. He chuckled. It wasn't a loud laugh. It was low, raspy, wet. Like water in the lungs. "A joke, my love," the man said. Serafina's knees nearly buckled. The voice. It was deeper, rougher, damaged by salt and water, but the cadence was unmistakable. It was him. "You're dead," she whispered. "I killed you." The man stood up and turned around. The porcelain mask gleamed in the moonlight. "You certainly tried," he said. The fall was exhilarating. The water was cold. The rocks were sharp. "Do you know what it feels like to drown, Serafina? To feel your lungs fill with ice, to feel the crabs nipping at your skin while you look up at the cliff and see your wife walking away?" "No." Serafina sobbed, backing away until her back hit a statue. "You are a ghost. A hallucination. I am tired. I am stressed." "Ghosts don't bleed," the man said. He reached up and slowly undid the clasp of his mask. "Don't," she pleaded. "Don't take it off. Look at me," he roared, the sudden violence in his voice making her jump. "Look at what you made." He pulled the mask away. Serafina screamed. The face beneath was Thorn, but it was a ruin of the man he used to be. The right side of his face was preserved, handsome and cruel as ever. But the left side was a landscape of horror. Scar tissue stretched tight over bone, the skin pale and waxen from years in the dark. His left eye was gone, replaced by a milky white orb. His ear was missing. A jagged scar ran from his temple to his jaw, pulsating as he spoke. He was a monster. A reanimated corpse. But he was breathing. Steam rose from his mouth in the cold air. "Thorn," she whimpered. "I have been waiting," Thorn said, taking a step toward her. He limped heavily, dragging his bad leg. 10 years, Serafina. 10 years I lived in the caves beneath the cliffs. Eating rats. Drinking rainwater. Healing. Planning. Why?" Serafina choked out. "Why didn't you come back sooner?" Thorn smiled, stretching the scar tissue hideously. "Because death clarifies things. I didn't just want the throne back. I wanted to watch you. I wanted to see if you could do it. If you could rule." He paused, looking her up and down. "And you did well. Better than I expected. You are ruthless. You are cold. You are, finally worthy of me." He reached out a hand. His fingers were gloved in black leather. "Come here," he commanded. Serafina was paralyzed. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to call the guards. But the guilt was a heavy anchor. Part of her felt she deserved this. Part of her had been waiting for this punishment for a decade. "What do you want?" she asked. "Everything," Thorn whispered. "I want my crown. I want my castle. And I want the wife who tried to murder me to kiss the hand she failed to stop." He took another step. He was close now. She could smell him. He didn't smell like perfume. He smelled of brine, old blood, and something else, something chemical. "Formaldehyde, but first," Thorn said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, "I have a secret of my own to tell you. A secret about that night on the cliffs. Something you didn't notice because you were too busy pushing me." Serafina stared at him, mesmerized by horror. "What secret?" Thorn leaned in, his ruined face inches from hers. The milky white eye seemed to stare right through her soul. "I didn't fall because you pushed me, Serafina," he hissed. "I jumped, the world spun." "What?" "I saw the assassins in the woods," Thorn grinned. "Your spymaster, Valerius. He had archers in the trees. If you hadn't pushed me, they would have put an arrow through my eye. You didn't kill me. You saved me. You were the perfect distraction." Serafina's mind reeled. Valerius? Her loyal spymaster. He had planned a coup, but... She stammered. "Why hide? Why stay dead?" "Because," Thorn said, reaching into his pocket and pulling out a small glass vial filled with a glowing green liquid. "I found something in the caves. Something older than this kingdom. Something that doesn't just heal, it evolves." He uncorked the vial and drank it in one gulp. Immediately, his body began to convulse. The sound of bones cracking echoed in the silent garden. Serafina watched in terror as his spine straightened. The limp leg snapped back into place. The scarred tissue on his face bubbled and shifted, knitting itself back into smooth skin. In seconds, the monster was gone. Standing before her was King Thorn, restored to his prime. Handsome. Terrifying. Whole, but his eyes were no longer human. They had turned entirely black. No whites. No iris. Just voids. "I am not just alive, my queen," Thorn said, his voice echoing with a strange, harmonic power. "I am reborn. And tonight, we are going to clear the board." He grabbed her arm. His grip was like a vice of steel. It wasn't human strength. "Let's go back to the party," he smiled. "I believe it's time for the king to make his entrance." Serafina tried to pull away, but she was helpless against his strength. He began to drag her back toward the palace, back toward the music and the unsuspecting guests. "Valerius is inside," Thorn said casually, as if discussing the weather. "I think I'll start with him. I'm going to pull his spine out through his throat in front of the entire court." "And you are going to watch and applaud?" "No," Serafina gasped. "I won't let you destroy them. You have no choice," Thorn laughed. "You created this. You pushed me into the dark. Don't be surprised that I came back as a shadow." As they reached the double doors, the sound of the waltz drifted out. It was a happy, light melody. A stark contrast to the nightmare unfolding. Thorn paused with his hand on the door handle. He looked at Serafina, his black eyes glistening. "Smile, my love," he whispered. "The dead are crashing the party." He threw the doors open. The cold wind from the garden rushed into the warm hall, blowing out the candles nearest the door. The music faltered. Heads turned, and there, framed in the doorway, stood the dead king, holding the terrified queen by the arm. The scream that tore from Serafina's throat was lost in the collective gasp of 1,000 people. He was back. And he was hungry. The silence that befell the grand hall was not the silence of peace, it was the silence of a held breath before a scream. The double doors slammed shut behind King Thorn and Queen Serafina, pushed by a gust of wind that seemed to carry the weight of the grave. The candles, which had been extinguished by the draft, suddenly flared back to life, but the flame was no longer golden. It was a sickly, pale green, casting corpse-like shadows across the terrified faces of the nobility. Thorn stood at the top of the marble staircase, his hand still clamped around Serafina's upper arm. His grip was bruising, but it was his presence that truly hurt. He radiated a coldness that seeped into the bones of everyone present. The dead king looked out at his subjects, the dukes who had forgotten him, the generals who had sworn allegiance to his wife, and the courtiers who had danced on his memory. "My loyal subjects," Thorn spoke. His voice didn't just carry across the room, it resonated in the chest cavities of the guests, a deep, vibrating thrum like a cello played in a tomb. "Why has the music stopped? Is it not a night for celebration?" A young duchess near the front fainted, crumpling to the floor in a heap of silk. No one moved to help her. Every eye was fixed on the man who was supposed to be fish food at the bottom of the cliffs of sorrow. Lord Valerius, the spymaster, was the first to recover. He was a man of logic, a man who didn't believe in ghosts. He saw a threat, and he acted. He signaled subtly to the royal guard stationed at the perimeter of the room, "Seize him." Valerius barked, his voice cracking slightly. "This is an impostor. A trick of the light. The king is dead." 6 guards, hand-picked for their loyalty to Seraphina, drew their swords and rushed the staircase. They were elite soldiers, trained to kill without hesitation. They moved in a phalanx, blades gleaming under the green light. Seraphina felt Thorn's grip loosen slightly. She expected him to draw a weapon, to run, or to use her as a human shield. Instead, he laughed. It was a wet, gurgling sound that made Seraphina's skin crawl. Thorn released her arm and took a step forward, meeting the charge with open arms. "Iron." Thorn mused, looking at the swords. "You bring iron to fight the tide." The first guard lunged, thrusting his sword toward Thorn's chest. Thorn didn't dodge. He moved with a speed that blurred the eye, catching the blade with his bare hand. Crack! The sound was sickeningly loud. Thorn had snapped the steel blade like a dry twig. Before the guard could process what had happened, Thorn grabbed him by the throat. He didn't squeeze, he simply absorbed. The veins in Thorn's hand turned black, and the guard's face went instantly gray. The soldier let out a choked gasp as his life force was drained in seconds, leaving him a husk of dry skin and bone. Thorn tossed the body aside like a rag doll. The ballroom erupted into chaos. Screams tore through the air as the guests trampled each other trying to reach the exits. But the doors wouldn't budge. It wasn't just a lock, the wood itself seemed to have fused with the stone frame, sealed by the same green energy pulsing from the chandeliers. "Valerius!" Thorn roared over the din. The sound shattered the wine glasses on the tables. "You tried to put an arrow in my eye. Come here and finish the job." Thorn descended the stairs. He didn't walk, he glided, the shadows around his feet stretching out like grasping claws to trip the remaining guards. He was a force of nature, a hurricane of violence in a velvet suit. Seraphina stood frozen on the dais. This was her chance. Thorn was distracted by his revenge. She looked at the carnage below, her guards being torn apart by a husband she no longer recognized. She looked at Valerius, who was backing away, terror finally breaking his stoic mask. She realized then that Thorn wasn't just enhanced. He was no longer human. The thing in the garden, the green liquid, he was a vessel for something ancient. She turned and ran. Not toward the main doors, they were sealed, but toward the small service door behind the throne, hidden behind a heavy tapestry. It was a passage used by servants to refill the wine. Leading down into the kitchen cellars, she slipped behind the tapestry just as she heard a wet tearing sound and a scream that was unmistakably Valerius. She didn't look back. She couldn't, the service tunnel was dark and smelled of damp stone and rat droppings. Seraphina tore off her heavy, jeweled mask and threw it aside. She hitched up her skirts and ran, the sounds of the massacre fading slightly as she descended. Her mind was racing. What is he? How do I stop him? She needed answers. And there was only one place to get them. The royal library wasn't enough. She needed the forbidden records. The archives of the first men, kept in the sealed vault of the alchemist's tower. Thorn had mentioned caves beneath the cliffs. The legend spoke of the Deep Ones, ancient entities worshipped by the primitive tribes before the kingdom was founded. She reached the kitchens. They were empty. The staff had likely fled or were hiding. She grabbed a lantern from a hook, lit it with shaking hands, and moved toward the north wing. As she navigated the labyrinthine corridors of the service levels, she realized the castle itself felt sick. The stone walls were weeping a viscous black slime. The air was getting colder with every step. Thorn's presence wasn't just in the ballroom, it was infecting the very foundations of the obsidian palace. Suddenly, a shadow detached itself from the wall ahead of her. Seraphina skidded to a halt, raising her lantern. "Who's there?" A figure stepped into the light. It was a maid, a young girl named Elara. But Elara wasn't moving right. Her head was cocked at an unnatural angle, and her eyes were entirely black, just like Thorn's. "The king is home," Elara said, her voice a distorted echo. "He wants to see you, Seraphina." "Why are you running?" "He isn't the king," Seraphina whispered, backing away. "He is everything," the maid replied. She lunged. Seraphina didn't think, she reacted. She swung the heavy brass lantern with all her strength. It connected with the maid's head with a sickening crunch. The girl fell, but she didn't bleed red. Black ichor splattered across the floor. The girl didn't scream, she just lay there, twitching, a smile still plastered on her face. "He is in the walls," the maid gurgled. "He is in the blood." Seraphina stepped over the body and ran. The corruption was spreading faster than she thought. It wasn't just Thorn, he was a hive mind. He could control anyone he touched, anyone weak enough. She burst out of the service tunnels and into the courtyard at the base of the alchemist's tower. The snow was falling heavily now, a white curtain hiding the horrors inside. She climbed the spiral stairs of the tower, her lungs burning, her legs screaming for rest. She reached the top floor, the grand alchemist's study. The old man, Master Amun, was gone, likely asleep in his quarters or dead. She went straight to the vault. It was locked with a puzzle mechanism, a series of rotating rings based on celestial alignments. Thorn had never bothered to learn it. He thought books were for weak men. But Seraphina had spent her night studying while he was out hunting. She spun the rings. The moon in the house of sorrow. The sun in the house of war. Click, the heavy iron door swung open. The smell of dust and old parchment hit her. She rushed in, scanning the shelves. She needed the Codex of the Deep. It was a book bound in shark skin, rumored to be written by a madman who survived a shipwreck on the cliffs of Sorrow 200 years ago. She found it on the bottom shelf, wrapped in oilcloth. She pulled it out and slammed it onto the desk, frantically flipping the pages under the lantern light, drawings of grotesque sea creatures. Maps of underwater cavern systems. And then, a page illuminated with green ink. The illustration showed a man drinking from a glowing pool in a cave. In the next drawing, the man was transforming, his eyes turning black, his strength multiplying. But the text was the key, the nectar of the void. She read aloud, translating the ancient dialect. "It does not give life. It replaces it. The drinker dies, and the shadow takes the seat of the soul. The shadow cannot be killed by steel or fire, for it is already dead." Her heart sank. If steel couldn't kill him, what could? She read on. "The shadow is bound to the darkness. It fears only the light of the truth. Not the sun, but the fire of purification. The alchemical gold. The perfect flame, the perfect flame." It was a myth. The ultimate goal of alchemy, a fire that burned so hot and pure it could destroy magical bonds. A fire that required a terrible sacrifice to create. A noise from the doorway made her freeze. Slow clapping. Seraphina turned slowly. Thorn was standing in the doorway of the vault. He was covered in blood, none of it his own. He held Valerius's severed head in his left hand, holding it by the hair like a lantern. "I knew you would come here," Thorn smiled. His teeth were now stained red. "You always were the smart one. Reading your little books while I ruled." He tossed the head onto the floor. It rolled to Seraphina's feet. Valerius's eyes wide in frozen terror. Did you find what you were looking for? Thorn asked, stepping into the room. The temperature plummeted. Frost began to form on the open pages of the codex. I found out what you are, Seraphina said, her hand resting on a jar of volatile chemicals on the desk. You aren't Thorn. You are a parasite in a dead man's suit. Semantics, Thorn shrugged. I have his memories. I have his lusts. And I have his hatred for you. God, he hated you, Seraphina. Even before the cliffs. He hated how the people loved you more. He hated how you were smarter than him. I can feel that hate. It's delicious. He was closing the distance. There was nowhere to run. The tower had only one exit. Why didn't you just kill me in the ballroom? Seraphina asked, stalling. She unscrewed the lid of the chemical jar behind her back, because Thorn stopped, his black eyes boring into hers. Killing you is easy. Breaking you? That takes time. I want you to see your kingdom turn into a graveyard. I want you to beg me to kill you. I will never beg, Seraphina spat. We'll see. Thorn reached for her. Seraphina threw the jar. It wasn't a perfect flame, but it was concentrated phosphorus acid. The jar smashed against Thorn's chest. The liquid hissed, burning through the velvet suit and eating into the gray flesh beneath. Smoke rose up. Thorn didn't scream. He looked down at the hole in his chest, where his ribs were visible, black, oily ribs. He looked annoyed, not hurt, rude. He muttered. He backhanded her. The blow was like being hit by a carriage. Seraphina flew across the room, crashing into a bookshelf. Books rained down on her. Her vision swam. She tasted copper. Thorn walked over and grabbed her by the throat, lifting her off the ground with one hand. Her feet kicked helplessly in the air. You can't fight a god, Seraphina, he whispered, tightening his grip. Now, sleep. When you wake up, the world will be different. As black spots danced in her vision and the air left her lungs, Seraphina's hand brushed against something on the floor. It was the codex. The book she had dropped, and in the corner of her fading vision, she saw a footnote she had missed. A tiny scrawl at the bottom of the page about the perfect flame. Ingredient 1, the heart of a traitor. Ingredient 2, the tear of a king. Thorn's mask, the porcelain mask he had worn, it had a painted tear. And Thorn, the real Thorn, was a traitor to his people. Darkness took her. She woke up to the sound of waves crashing. Cold, salty spray hit her face. She was tied to a wooden post. She opened her eyes. It was dawn, but the sun was blocked by heavy gray clouds. She was not in the castle. She was at the Cliffs of Sorrow. The exact spot where she had pushed him 10 years ago. Thorn was standing at the edge, looking down at the churning black water below. Behind him, dozens of infected nobles stood silently, their black eyes watching. Full circle, Thorn said, turning to face her. I thought it poetic. This is where I was born. This is where you will die. Seraphina tested the ropes. They were tight. She looked around. On a stone altar nearby lay the shattered remains of the porcelain mask and something else. A golden chalice. Thorn picked up the chalice. It was filled with the green liquid, but not yet, he grinned. First, you drink. You become like me. And we rule together. Forever. He started walking toward her with the cup. Seraphina remembered the codex. The perfect flame. She needed fire. She needed a traitor's heart. And she needed a king's tear. She looked at Thorn. He was the traitor. The tear was on the mask. But where was the fire? Then she saw it, Valerius. Or rather, Valerius's headless body, which had been dragged here by the infected guards. It was lying near the edge. And hanging from his belt was a pouch of alchemist's fire, standard issue for the spymaster's suicide kit. She had one chance. Thorn, she yelled. He stopped. Any last words before communion? You said Thorn hated me, she gasped, because I was smarter than him. Do you know why I pushed him that night? Thorn tilted his head, curious. Why? Because he was weak, Seraphina lied, her eyes darting to the pouch on the corpse. And so are you, Thorn snarled, his ego, the remnants of the human king, flaring up. He rushed at her, abandoning the slow torture for a quick strike. That was his mistake. He was powerful, but he was arrogant. The wind at the cliffs of sorrow howled like a banshee, tearing at Seraphina's dress and whipping her hair across her face, blinding her for split seconds at a time. But the real storm was standing right in front of her. King Thorn, his face a mask of supernatural rage and rotting vanity, closed the distance between them in a heartbeat. He didn't run like a man, he moved like a blurred image, a glitch in reality. Seraphina braced herself against the wooden post, her wrists raw and bleeding from the ropes. She had provoked him. She had called him weak. It was a gamble, a desperate bet that the remnants of the man named Thorn, the insecure tyrant she had married, were still alive somewhere beneath the skin of the eldritch monster. Weak? Thorn roared, his voice distorting into a harmonic screech that made the ground tremble. He grabbed her by the throat, pinning her against the wood. The force of the impact knocked the air from her lungs. I have conquered death. I have eaten the hearts of gods in the deep dark. And you are just meat, he squeezed. Seraphina's vision began to tunnel. Black spots danced before her eyes. The infected nobles standing in a semicircle behind him watched with dead, shark-like eyes, silent witnesses to their queen's execution. But you still need me, Seraphina choked out, clawing at his freezing, stone-hard hand. You hesitated, Thorn paused. The black void of his eyes narrowed. I did not, you did, she gasped, fighting for every syllable. You want me to drink the cup. You want a queen. Because, without me, you're just a monster in a cave. It was the truth, and it cut deeper than any blade. Thorn was a creature of ego. The shadow inside him fed on power, but the human host fed on validation. He didn't just want to rule, he wanted Seraphina to witness it. He released her throat, letting her slump against the ropes, gasping for air. You have a sharp tongue, Thorn sneered, stepping back and picking up the golden chalice from the altar. The green liquid inside swirled sluggishly, glowing with a radioactive luminescence. I will enjoy cutting it out after you turn. He turned his back to her for a split second to admire the chalice against the gray light of the dawn. Now, Seraphina didn't waste the breath she had just fought for. She dislocated her thumb. It was a trick her father, a hunting master, had taught her when she was a child, to escape a snare. The pain was blinding, a sharp, white-hot spike that shot up her arm. She bit through her lip to stifle the scream. With a sickening pop, the joint gave way. Her hand became narrow enough to slide through the blood-slicked rope. She was free, but she didn't run away. Running was death. Thorn was faster than a horse, stronger than a bear. There was only one way out. She lunged, not at Thorn, but at the corpse of Valerius lying 5 feet away. Thorn spun around, sensing the movement. What? Seraphina threw herself onto the headless body of her spymaster. Her hands frantically searched the belt. Where is it? Where is it? Get away from that carrion. Thorn bellowed, raising his hand. A blast of kinetic force, like an invisible hammer, slammed into the ground inches from her, shattering the rock. Shards of stone sliced her cheek, but she didn't stop. Her fingers closed around the cold leather of the pouch. The alchemist's fire. Thorn was on her. He grabbed her by the hair, yanking her up. She screamed as she was lifted off her feet, the pouch clutched tight in her good hand. Enough games. Thorn hissed, his face inches from hers. The skin on his cheek was rippling, something serpentine moving beneath the surface. Open your mouth. He brought the chalice to her lips, forcing the rim against her teeth. The smell of the green liquid was overpowering, ammonia and rotting flowers. Seraphina looked into his black eyes. She saw the void. She saw the end of her kingdom. I said, she whispered, spitting blood into his face. Open yours. With her free hand, she smashed the pouch of alchemist's fire against the shards of the porcelain mask lying on the altar next to them. The pouch ruptured. The volatile chemicals inside made contact with the air, and more importantly, with the king's tear, the painted porcelain shard she had grabbed in the chaos. The reaction was instantaneous. Flash, it wasn't a normal fire. It was a blinding, magnesium-white explosion that roared with the sound of 1,000 breaking windows. It was the perfect flame. The fire of purification, Thorn shrieked, a sound that wasn't human, a sound that made the infected nobles cover their ears and fall to their knees. The white fire didn't burn Seraphina. It washed over her like warm water, harmless. But to Thorn, to the creature of shadow and rot, it was acid. He dropped Seraphina and staggered back, clawing at his face. The fire was clinging to him, eating away the false skin. Burning through the magic that held his dead body together. It burns, he screamed, the voice now splitting into two, the deep, demonic roar of the entity and the pathetic, high-pitched wail of the human King Thorn. Make it stop, Seraphina scrambled back, clutching her dislocated thumb. She watched in horrified fascination. The fire was stripping him. The velvet suit turned to ash. The handsome face melted away like wax, revealing the skull beneath. But the skull wasn't bone, it was black obsidian. The entity was trying to leave the host. A massive, shadowy shape, like a cloud of ink, began to pour out of Thorn's mouth and eyes, trying to escape the burning vessel. You cannot kill me, the shadow roared, forming a towering, smoky figure above the cliffs. I am eternal. Seraphina stood up. The wind was whipping the white flames into a frenzy. You are eternal, she yelled over the roar of the fire. But he is not. She looked at the teetering, burning skeleton of her husband. He was stumbling blindly toward the edge of the cliff. The same edge she had pushed him from 10 years ago. The shadow realized too late what was happening. It was tethered to the body. If the body was destroyed completely before the shadow could sever the link, the entity would be dragged down with it. The shadow lunged back into the body, trying to stabilize it, trying to stop the fall. Seraphina, the burning figure croaked. It reached out a skeletal hand. For a second, the blackness in the eyes cleared, and a terrified, human blue eye looked at her. Help me, it was Thorn. The real Thorn. Waking up one last time in hell, Seraphina looked at him. She looked at the man who had tormented her, the man who had returned to destroy her world. She felt a pang of pity, sharp and cold. Goodbye, Thorn, she whispered. She didn't push him this time. She didn't have to. The ground beneath his feet, weakened by the alchemical explosion, gave way. With a final, gargling cry, the burning king fell backward. He plummeted into the gray fog. Seraphina rushed to the edge and looked down. There was no splash. As the burning body hit the churning black water below, the alchemist's fire reacted with the sea. A massive column of steam hissed up, hiding the impact. And then, silence. The green glow in the sky faded. The oppressive weight in the air lifted instantly, like a physical burden removed from the world. Behind her, the sound of thumping bodies made her turn. The infected nobles, the dukes, the generals, the innocent maidens, had all collapsed to the ground. The blackness was draining from their eyes like ink leaking onto snow. They were groaning, waking up, confused and terrified, with no memory of how they had gotten to the cliffs. The hive mind was broken. The queen bee was dead. Seraphina sank to her knees. The adrenaline crashed, leaving her shaking uncontrollably. She held her injured hand to her chest and wept. Not for Thorn. Not for Valerius. But for the sheer, impossible weight of survival. The aftermath. A week later, the funeral for King Thorn, the second one, was a private affair. There was no body, of course. Just an empty casket buried deep in the royal crypts, sealed with lead and blessed by 12 high priests. The official story was that the king had returned miraculously, only to succumb to his old wounds while valiantly defending the queen from a cultist uprising, led by the rogue spymaster Valerius. It was a lie, but it was a lie the kingdom needed. It gave them a hero. It gave them closure. Queen Seraphina sat in her solar, her hand bandaged in a silk sling. The sun was streaming through the window, real. Warm sunlight, not the cold gray of the past week. The door opened, and the new captain of the guard entered. "Your Majesty," he bowed. "The alchemists have finished sweeping the caves beneath the cliffs, and—" Serafina asked, her voice steel. "Empty, Your Majesty. Just old bones and sea slime. Whatever was down there, is gone." "Good," she said. "Seal the entrance. Collapse the caves. I want ton weights of rock on top of that beach. No one enters. Ever." "It is already done," the captain hesitated. "There is one more thing. We found this washing up on the shore. We thought you should see it." He placed a small object on her desk. It was the porcelain mask. Or what was left of it. It was scorched, cracked, and blackened by fire. But the left eye, the painted tear, was untouched. It gleamed white and pristine. Serafina stared at it. She reached out with her good hand and touched the cold ceramic. "Burn it," she said. "Your Majesty, take it to the furnace," she ordered, not looking up. "Burn it until it is dust. Then scatter the dust in the wind. Do not bury it. Do not keep it." "Yes, Your Majesty." The captain took the mask and left. Serafina walked to the window. She looked out at her kingdom, at the people rebuilding, living, breathing. She touched her own stomach. A phantom pain echoed there. The stress, the poison, the fear, it had taken its toll. She would never remarry. She would never trust the sea again. And she would never, ever let the fires go out in the palace, because she knew the truth now. The dead don't always stay dead. Sometimes they wait. Sometimes they change, and sometimes, the only way to kill a monster is to become just ruthless enough to survive it. She turned away from the window, her silhouette sharp against the light. "Long live the Queen," she whispered to the empty room, and for the first time in 10 years, the shadows in the corner of the room did not whisper back.